Alright, so this was just going to be a quick follow-up video to the monk and the samurai guy. Those are just videos to get you an idea of it. It's not to say everything in there is um, like, I'm not showing optimal rotations or whatever. I'm showing like halfway decent ones, but not optimal ones. But then also I wanted to go through and mention a few things that I think got cut out because I didn't go back and fully rewatch them because I've tried to do this video probably at least like 3 different times and my mic was having problems, so I'm using a different controller and for some reason I'm not having the audio skips that I was beforehand. So just to make sure that I said most of the important stuff is that, like, whenever you first start the game, you're only going to see up to level 30 or whatever, and that's basically the same as what's the name of it? You're only gonna see the class or whatever. The class is basically like, say, gadgets or whatever. Imagine gadgets from DC and you have 1 through 30 as gadgets or whatever. And what's the name of it or whatever. And but once you hit level 30 as gadgets, imagine upgrading into engineer and you ended up seeing a whole bunch of extra moves. That's pretty much how Final Fantasy is. You have your class, which is the base, what's the name of it, which is the base foundational bit, and then once you hit level 30, you do a mission and you upgrade into a specific job, which is or whatever that ends up being there. Samurai is technically something that is just a job. It doesn't have a class. You can't do it from level 1. Monk you can, however, do from level 1. And there's a few, what's the name of it? There's a few different moves that I mean, not moves. There are a few different jobs inside of the game that what's the name of it, that are also, I guess you could say, skips, so to speak, that you can't unlock them until later on. Red Mage, which is one of the ranged magic dealers, I know starts off at level 50. I know Machinist and Dancer, I believe, start off late. I think Bard you can go through and do since level 1. That actually starts off as Archer, I think. Ninja, I can't remember if you can do Ninja or not. I can't remember. I know Dragoon you can do. That's Lancer ranking up. I forgot which of these you technically can't get until later on, but I know for tanks you can't do Gunbreaker until level on. This is level 60, and I think Dark Knight is another one that you can't do. Dark Knight I think is around 40 to 50, I think, but I think it starts at level 30, but I think you have to be like level 40 or 50 inside of the story in order to start it, I think. Warrior and Paladin you can start off with, however. And any of these classes, basically what ends up happening is each of the classes slash job is linked to a specific weapon. And so whenever you switch weapons, so say for example I go into this armory and say I decide to equip my Gunbreaker or whatever, that's immediately going to go through and switch me over to, what's the name of it, I'm just going to unequip all of my samurai gear, and it says you change to Gunbreaker or whatever. And then or whatever, each of the, what's the name of each of those is gonna immediately go through and throw in your fucking soul crystal or whatever, which is basically just the, how can I put this, this is what upgrades a class normally to a job. Jobs are also going to have them, so say Gunbreaker just is just a job, so it just automatically came with it. But what you can also, what you can do is basically each of those jobs that I listed, whether it's a healer, DPS, tank, whatever, you can actually go through and basically set up like a shitload of fucking armories or whatever. What's the name of it? You can, I think it's, what is it, 15? I think that's showing at the bottom of that screen. I can't make it out on my fucking TV. I think it's 15. But what's the name of it? You can have up to like 15 of these that you can just immediately switch to. So I can have that particular job, the gear, the loadout, and the style all saved, and I can switch between these whenever I feel like it. And the only bad thing is that technically, what is it? Glamour plates, aka the style that's saved from it, you can't update it, so to speak. How can I put this? You can't update it if you're not inside of one of the big 3 cities. I'm not inside of a big 3 city because I'm next to the spawn targets right now. But what's the name of it? That's just a minor inconvenience. Like my tank gear by default technically has my paladin style saved inside of it, but if I was inside of a big 3 city, then my Gunbreaker would end up having something different because my Gunbreaker has a what's the name of it? It has a completely different style, but that style would end up equipping and overriding what you're currently seeing if I was inside of one of the big 3 cities. But you can switch between them whenever you want. But basically all you do in order to unlock one of those other jobs is you just end up going to a mission in the open world. You can end up Googling it. You go to where that particular mission is. So say I was a gunbreaker or whatever. I was a paladin and then I switched over to gunbreaker. All I do is I just go to an open world mission or whatever for gunbreaker, looked it up, and then I go through and do that mission, and then they give me a gunbreaker weapon. And then that gunbreaker weapon, whenever I throw it on, boom, Soul of the Gunbreaker is unlocked. Now I officially have a gunbreaker that starts off at level 60. But let's say if I didn't skip up Pugilist or whatever, if I was just say a rank 60 paladin, I was like, actually, you know what, whatever, let me do Pugilist. I go to the Pugilist mission that's level 1. Boom, it gives me a level 1, what's the name of it? I finish the mission, it gives me a level 1 Pugilist weapon. I put that Pugilist weapon on, boom, I'm down to level 1. I am no longer level 60 from Paladin. I am a level 1 Pugilist, which means now I gotta go through, kill level 1, 2, 3, 4 ads, and I have to rank up the Pugilist. Now the good part about this is that I don't have to go through and do the story missions again or whatever, and basically re-progress through that stupid grindy or whatever. What you could essentially do is have a friend that can kill ads for you or whatever. If you want to try to speed it up a little bit, you would essentially end up killing ads until you hit level 15, and then once you hit level 15, you would be able to go through and start running some of the you would be able to go through and start running some of the content or whatever, and then you can just spam out these dungeons. There are no loot locks on any of the dungeons that I've seen. You will always get rewards, you'll always get currency, whatever the reward ends up being or whatever, you'll always end up getting a whole bunch of them. And as a side note, I do not even have, like, I think I have most of the 4-player content for Realm Reborn or whatever. Heaven's Ward, I do not have the extra stuff unlocked. This is just from the main story. There's a lot more content, like probably double to triple what you're currently seeing for fucking Stormblood and Heaven's Ward. That's just in side missions that I have not gotten to yet or whatever. Like, I think whenever I added it up, like content wise, like Final Fantasy was like excluding the hard versions, which technically would be in the favor of Final Fantasy since there's like 2-3 difficulty settings for some content. Just excluding hard modes, just in terms of individual or whatever individual instances, there was twice as much content as what there was on DC, and none of these are fucking reskins. There are literally no map reskins. They're literally all completely fucking different maps all the way through, and I've literally done all of the dungeons up to the very, very latest DLC, all the way up to level 70 or whatever. I've went through and done it, and I still have not seen a reskin of a map. All you're gonna have is just hard versions of a previous map, which is gonna be the same map, but it's also going to have different bosses. It's not even the same bosses that you end up fighting. Sometimes it'll be different ads and it'll be different bosses with completely different mechanics, but the instance name will actually end up being the same. So like, it's not even like, say, SG or whatever, like say SG and SGE, where Elite is just 1 or 2 extra mechanics and it's hitting harder. No, you're talking about completely different ads or whatever, and a completely different difficulty setting, like different bosses, blah blah blah, whatever. There's a higher variety here in terms of the content, but you would be hit level 15 and then you would keep going through and just spamming out content in order to get XP for for that role, and then you would just go to a vendor and buy gear or whatever as you ranked up in order to go through and to rank it up or whatever. And that's also a good thing too, is because there's no currency like DC. So say like there used to be episode specific DLC, like say source marks, or say whenever you got to Teen Titans, you would need to have the the Titan creds or the Atlantean crowns. There's none of that. Technically, you can go all the way up to level 50 and just use gil, aka the money that you earn in the game, which they give you for doing the story or whatever. You'll get gil, aka their money from completing content, and you'll get it from doing story missions. Like just from hitting 50 the first time, you'll have over 500,000 that I had, which is enough for multiple fucking sets of gear. Not only are you going to have the drops inside of the content in order to go through and fucking gear up, which you should be finishing a set before you unlock the next dungeon to go through and start doing, because you're technically going to be level locked, but then there's also going to be the vendors that you can just straight up buy gear from as well. So whenever it comes to ranking up alts, it's actually really, really quick and easy or whatever. Actually, I don't want to say quick and easy. It's quick and easy if you have the time to put in order to go through and to grind it out. but it's it's a lot more convenient than DC, and there's no skill points to worry about, there's no artifacts to worry about. All you have is literally just mods, and these mods are actually really easy to get. Like, these are cheap as fuck inside of the inside of the broker, aka the marketplace. But I can also go through and salvage gear, and I can also end up getting these, or at least for me, because I'm a high enough rank, if I wanted to get the high end, the like the in-game ones, I could go through and I could use this. This is the duty roulette system, which is basically a system where anytime there's content, how can I put it? It's going to randomly pick content inside of this area or whatever, inside of these restrictions. So 50, 60, 70 dungeons, leveling dungeons, aka 1 through 50, trials, which are basically just boss fights alone, and then main scenario, which is any of the storyline missions. Each of these has a daily lockout. So say the very top part where it has the little funky little golden wheel or whatever with the up arrow, that's basically XP. That's basically saying that I'm going to be getting scaling XP based on whatever level I am. I'm going to get X amount of XP based on that, going to get X amount of money based on that, and then I'm also going to end up getting 300 tombstones. Those tombstones are used to unlock gear later on. Those are kind of like source marks, so to speak. Those just help you skip faster. But then in addition to that, I also have the adventure and need bonus, which is extra money and experience that I'm going to get for queuing up as a specific role. So you're going to have adventure and need tanks, you're going to have healers or whatever. Right now it's technically just full tank, but technically you're going to have healers that are going to be frequent as fuck as well. And you're also going to have DPSs rarely. So anytime there ends up being, what's the name of it? Anytime a group is having trouble finding a particular role, they'll just throw up an adventure and need bonus, and then you go in there, queue up for it, and then boom, you can end up doing it. Now, with that being said, one of these three currencies right here, or whatever, this one cracked Stella cluster and the cracked planet cluster, whenever I look this up, like, I can actually get like 2-3 mods from this. Like, just from going through and turning these in at a vendor, I can get 2-3 mods. So I can get 2 or 3 mods just from going through and running one instance in here. And this doesn't loot lock. The adventure in need does not loot lock. You can run this, you can get this as many times as you want. This part will loot lock, this part will not. And so I can literally just spam out dungeons all day and literally just keep getting 2-3 mods every single instance that I run. So if I spend an entire day running dungeons, I could literally mod out my entire character. And that's probably not even an entire day. Depending on how quick the instance is, I may end up finishing that in maybe half a day, a third of a day, depending or whatever. But going through and ranking up is relatively easy. Also, I want to mention that the 1, 2, 3 underlyings or whatever, those hold for each and every single class, but each one of these is going to be unique. There is not going to be a single double up, so to speak, in terms of, like, say, what we had with mental and gadgets AM or whatever. Every single every single job is going to have its own unique function or whatever. You're going to have the ranged spellcasters who are going to do good damage at a range. The melee DPSs are technically going to end up being higher, like monk, dragoon, ninja, and samurai should end up putting out more damage, but these are going to be ranged. So one, they're not going to have to avoid as many mechanics, but they also end up having channels, which means that if they end up stopping those channels, then they end up losing DPS because they have to start over completely. As like, as like monk or as gunbreaker, I can go through and I can move while attacking. You can't do this if you're one of the ranged mages or whatever. You're not allowed to do that. And so, or whatever, they end up having their own skill cap because you have to know the mechanics of the instance in order to minimize the amount of time that you're moving to maximize your uptime in order to keep your DPS high. Ranged DPSs, they're just naturally going to end up doing less damage than the melee DPSs, but they're mostly buffs. The bard and the dancer end up buffing other people, and their rotations, if I remember correctly, are proc based, which means that whenever they basically have an RNG on their rotation. So you remember, if you watched the other video, I think it was Perfect Balance that I ended up hitting as monk, and then I would switch my rotation into boot shine / dragon kick, and that would end up being different from the basic 1, 2, 3 that I ended up doing. Some of these ranged DPS power sets have the same one, where except for instead of hitting a certain move in order to trigger that, it's RNG. So as soon as a proc ends up happening, as soon as they see that they got some type of effect that is within their job, they would end up switching and doing a different rotation at that point, which makes it a little bit more difficult because it's reactionary instead of pre-planned, so to speak. But each of these is going to be different. Healers are healers, but they're expected to technically put out damage. I don't think I mentioned it inside of the last 2 edits, but I'm going to mention it instead. DPS checks inside of this game aren't meant just for the DPSs. If the DPSs are the only one putting out damage, you're not going to end up beating the DPS checks in higher content. You're going to want to put out damage as a healer and as a tank as well. And so to go through and to just give a quick idea of the what's the name of it, of the tanking or whatever, as you can see or whatever, at least at least I'm hoping you would assume based off of how the pictures look, literally all of my base rotation down at the bottom of the screen, these are all damage moves or whatever, each and every single one of these except for Brutal Strike. Brutal Strike doubles as a damage move and a healing move. So Keen Edge is my 1, and then Brutal Shell is my 2, but that's also going to go through and actually heal me and give me a small shield, I think, inside of PvP. But then while I'm doing that basic rotation, I have my shields that are also going to end up being here. I have Reprisal, which is a 10% reduction. Heart of Stone, I think it's somewhere around a 15 or 20. Camouflage is, what's the name of it? Camouflage is around a 15-ish. Arm's Length is 20, is a 20% attack speed slow. And then I have Aurora, that's up here. That is a healing over time, which is similar to Atomics. And then I also have Rampart, which is, what's the name of it? Rampart, which is a 20% shield. Heart of Light, which is a reduction in magic damage taken for the entire group for X amount of time. Nebula, which I think is a 30% shield. Super Bolide, which is basically my invincibility. I go down to 1 health, but I can't take damage or whatever from the vast majority of attacks for X amount of seconds. Provoke and Shirk are basically just aggro management. Low Blow is a stun. Interject is an interrupt. And basically all of those shields, heals, and stuff you end up clipping in between. So I could go through and I can end up clipping each and every single one of these or whatever in between my DPS rotation. I could be clipping in damage moves, or I could be clipping in that. I could go through and I could clip in 2 moves or whatever if I want to as well or whatever. And the same thing goes for DPS as well. Sometimes, depending on the animations of the moves, you can go through and you can actually clip 2 moves in between your weapon skills. And so that actually allows you to go through your abilities faster. The thing is, sometimes you'll end up butting heads with the end of the cooldown. So how can I put this? So you see the little clock down window. If you wait until that clock is done and then you end up hitting a move, you're technically not going as fast as what you could. What you want to do is you want to be pushing the button before that clock is done. So therefore the game essentially preloads what option you want. So as soon as it becomes available, it automatically hits it. That basically keeps your rotation smooth, so to speak. But ever so often, if you try to do a double clip, then it's not going to end up working. So say for example, let's do Keen Edge, this, and then I end up hitting this or whatever. It froze there for a second. It stuttered or whatever on Keen Edge. It didn't immediately hit it as soon as the window ended. That was an animation clip. Some of them are unavoidable, some of them are, depending on what the clip order is. You'll have to go through and play with it. But you can either just clip 1 move in between safely, or you can try to do 2 in some cases and be fine. That's one reason why most people inside of the game don't actually spec for skill speed in order to have faster rotations, is because they want the ability to go through and do double casts. I want speed or whatever, because obviously people already know how I am, but I want speed, so I'm just going to go through it. Most of the time I'll try to find a way to just do a single clip, but at least for me, for Gunbreaker, I actually wanted to go through and optimize my DPS on this one, so I'll be doubling up. But that's the foundation for tanks or whatever. You're going to have a DPS rotation, but then you're going to end up doing it. I'm just going to go through and just describe Gunbreaker and Paladin really quickly. So I have my 1-2-3 combo just like Monk and Samurai do, and every every time I end up hitting this 3, I end up getting one of the cartridges, which is going to end up being inside of the top right, the little blue balls there. Those can be expended on Burst Strike, which is going to be damage, or Gnash and Claw, which is basically a combo. So that's the first combo. That's the first attack. There's a combo for it. This is the second attack. This is the combo for it. This is the third attack, and then this is the combo for it. In addition to that, I also have a dash. I also have Bow Strike, which is like the AoE clip move. I have a, what's the name of it? A long ass DOT. That's actually really, really fucking useful. And then I have a weapon buff, just like what Monk did or whatever with, Riddle of Fire. where Aurora is going to be a, what is it, I believe it's a 40% buff, no, 20% buff, sorry, I'm bugging, 20% buff for 20 seconds or whatever, and that has a minute long cooldown. So basically I want to go through and I want to fit in getting rid of my burst, what's the name of it, getting rid of my cartridges inside of that 20-second window, along with getting rid of all of the other cooldowns that I have. Now, unfortunately, because of my skill speed, I can't do a trick that I like doing or whatever, the way that I want to do it. So what I can do is I can hit Brutal Shell and then hit my weapon buff, and I can go through my long ass combo with Gnashing Fang, Gnashing Claw, whatever it was, and I can hit Burst Strike, and then I can come back to the Solid Barrel later, and then go back into a second, what's the name of it, into a second Burst Strike. So Gnashing Claw would be 1 cartridge done, this would be 2 cartridges done, but then I could hit this if I've saved it, and then that'll give me a third one, and then I can end up hitting another Burst Strike. However, in order for me to go through and do that with everything else, I can't lay Sonic Break inside of that rotation yet. My skill speed is not high enough that'll allow me to do it after I've hit No Mercy. I can't fit it in. So what I actually end up having to do is I have to hit Sonic Burst before I actually end up getting to that point. So just to show, and what's the name of it on, because I already made a video on this the first time that I actually found out how to do this, but this is just the first time that I'm actually explaining it, so to speak. So I would have Keen Edge here, and then I'm going to lay my DOT early here, and then this is going to get this, hit my weapon buff, boom, Gnashing Fang, damage move, start off the second combo. I'm going to clip in Rough Divide, which is going to be my dash move for some extra damage, Burst Strike, clip with that, reset this, get the extra one, and then boom. And then that ends up being everything within 16 seconds. So if I had a little bit more skill speed, I'd technically be able to fit in 1 more Solid Barrel inside of that window before Without Mercy ended up disappearing. But essentially that's an idea of the Gunbreaker rotation. There's other moves that end up, so say for example, Bloodfest, that ends up giving me 2 cartridges immediately, just like Samurai had the one move that gave it key gauge every so often. You'll have shortcuts sometimes, but essentially you're a DPS or whatever as a tank while clipping your shields, but you have nowhere near the manages. You're not going to have 2-3 different things to go through and manage, like say Samurai and Monk or whatever. You're just going to have 1 mechanic to go through and manage, and then your shields in addition to that. So just to get out of combat so I can switch over to Paladin to show the other one or whatever. Gunbreaker has the highest DPS out of the tanks, but Paladin also still does good damage from what I've heard after their last what's the name of it, after their last rework. Another note about Final Fantasy is that instead of having auras and materials on your actual character, they're actually on the weapons, which I've actually somewhat kind of grown to like just a little bit more, just because I do like the animations inside of this game for some of the attacks. So having the auras and stuff be on the weapons is actually kind of cool for me personally. But so say Paladin is going to be kind of like is going to be kind of like how Monk was. So I'm going to start off with a 1 and then a 2. But then I have this move over here, which is a DOT. And then I have 1, 2, and then 3. And I'm going to end up doing this 1, 2, 3 2 times. And then I'm going to go back and reapply the DOT afterward. That's going to end up being the, what's the name of it, the basic rotation for Paladin. And then you have different moves that you'll end up clipping. So say I have my Interrupt, my Stun, and then my Interrupt, my Stun, then I have Spears within, which is basically a burst damage based on what my current health is, and I can clip these in between the different combos that I'm doing in order to maximize my DPS, hitting those off a cooldown or saving them for specific adds as needed. I'm going to have, I think it's Fighter Flight, which is technically my 20-second, actually no, this is a 25-second buff for 25%, still has a 60-second cooldown. AoE is going to be the exact, AoE is going to be the exact same. You're also going to have an AoE clip move, just like what we had beforehand with, what's the name of it, with Prominence, I mean not Prominence, I think that's, Eclipse? No, Circle of the Storm. I'm getting these names confused. Total Eclipse is the other one. Circle of Scorn or whatever. This is another one that's AoE, but you're also able to use it on single target if you want to. Paladin, instead of having Brutal Shell, which is a very, very small heal slash shield or like a healing over time, Paladin actually has Clemency, which is a burst heal that can be like a fourth to a third of my health. It's fucking crazy sometimes, especially if you end up specking for crit. Just to show this really quick though, I can go through and I can use Circle of Scorn in between on my single target rotation. But then Paladin also has a whole bunch of utility stuff. So it's like, so say cover, take all damage intended for another party member, but it requires Oath Gauge or whatever. Now Oath Gauge is a system that is the like the little glowing thing that's up at the top next to the fucking chat. That goes up by me using auto attacks or whatever. Every time I do an auto attack, it'll go through and it'll increase my Oath Gauge. So, or whatever, it'll go through and increase my Oath Gauge by 5. So that has a set timer on it in terms of how frequently I can go through and use that. So that's another management that's kind of like my kinky gauge, but it doesn't build as fast as what Samurai ends up building. But I can take all damage intended for another person. Divine Veil ends up being a group shield anytime I receive healing, so I can pop Divine Veil and then hit Clemency afterward and basically put a group shield on the entire group at will if I deem it a situation that's like that. In addition to the basic sword DOT that I showed beforehand, later on there's also going to end up being a magic damage rotation for spells that Paladin ends up getting, so that ends up being their secondary damage mechanics. So say like Gunbreaker had the basic 1, 2, 3, and then you had the Gnashing Fang that ended up going into combos. Instead of going into combos, Paladin goes into magic spells instead for their rotation. Now going back to the Oath Gauge, in addition to being able to use it on cover, another move that I can use it on more primarily is going to be Sheltron, which is going to block incoming attacks. And basically what that blocking is not a 100% block, but essentially blocking is blocking is basically a stat that's over here or whatever, that's inside of shield or whatever. This is like specifically for Paladin, and I think maybe one other type of job I think has a shield, but essentially you can have the block strength, which is going to reduce the damage from an attack more than normal. You can get it like somewhere between 15-20%, something along those lines. So if I have 50 Oath Gauge and I see a big boss attack incoming, I can use 50 Oath Gauge in order to hit Sheltron and take off like 20% of the damage that's about to be dealt without having to burn one of my longer cooldowns. Because all of these shields have longer cooldowns. These are not cooldowns that you want to use frequently or whatever. Like, you don't want to spam them back to back. You want to time them out for whenever they're needed. So say this is 60 seconds, Rampart is 90 seconds. Let me go back to, what is it, Arm's Length was, what was Arm's Length? Arm's Length is 2 minutes. Sentinel is, Sentinel is going to be 2 minutes or whatever. Like, just like all of these have decently long cooldowns. You can't just pop them. They all last, and they only last for like 10 to 15 seconds. They don't last that long. They're just meant to temporarily decrease damage that you know for a fact is about to be coming in shortly after. But you're going to end up doing that. There's going to be mana management in the spells or whatever that you're going to end up having to add in, but normally whenever you get your rotation, it's going to have the mana management taken into mind already. So once you figure out your rotation, the mana management you won't necessarily have to think about. The only time that technically gets thrown out of whack is if you have to use Clemency in order to heal yourself. And that's actually another cool thing about Clemency, is that instead of just healing you can actually use it on somebody else. You, as a tank, I can go through and heal another party member for say like a third or fourth or whatever, for like say like a third of their health, and then half of that is going to end up being sent to me. I end up getting half of that in addition to that. So I can heal myself for say, I don't know, let's just say 25,000. I can heal myself for 25,000 health, or I can heal somebody else for 25,000 health and get 12,500 myself, which actually ends up making Paladin like really, really good for support utility or whatever, for being able to help out just in case you have a new healer or you need to keep yourself or somebody else alive. Say you're two-manning content, anything along those lines. Paladin actually does really, really well just because of the utility that it has. It has constant mitigation. It doesn't have any healing besides Clemency, but it has a lot of mitigation tools, since the Oath Gauge actually builds up faster than what you would normally expect it to. And then what's the name of it? That's as opposed to Gunbreaker, that has mitigation as well as healing or whatever. It has healing from Brutal Shell and it has healing from Aurora. And then Warrior and Dark Knight actually have even more healing options directly or whatever. Their mitigation options are less, but they have more healing options. So each of the tanks is going to be slightly different, and they're going to have their own niches in terms of where they end up excelling, and they're all going to have their own different interactions from a tank perspective. But I just wanted to go through and talk about tanks and to add some extra information that I think I missed inside of the DPS video. If there's any additional questions, just go through and just leave a comment and let me know. But I think I covered most of the introductory stuff that I can say. Still, technically being a noob, I don't want to go through and say some other stuff. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and end the